Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to go over a area in chapter 9 that students have asked me about. Now, I will say this as a sort of a preemptive understanding of what I will be going over. It involves a little bit of math. Now, from a pure testing perspective, you're simply not going to see questions related to, the moment arm distance and the force and this on this particular area. But it's important to understand the concepts to get a good appreciation for exactly what happens or what it looks like when somebody has different physiology or anatomy. And that's really what we're talking about here. It's chapter 9. I'm on page 366. This is the Muscular Training Foundations and Benefits. And on 366, factors that influence muscular strength and hypertrophy. Now, I will say that the area that I want to talk to you about, which is the limb length, and more importantly, it's figure 935, because that's really the one area I know most folks look at that and they go, what does that figure even mean? It's actually pretty simple. It's really straightforward. I just need to perhaps explain it to you, make it easy to understand and appreciate. The goal then is to kind of help you to understand that, so you appreciate the differences with how individuals, because of their anatomy, length of their muscles, position of the tendon, things like that, affect muscular strength. And of course, there is a relation to hypertrophy. So just a lot of reading, of course, which can be a little tedious if you're trying to understand this, but it is good information. And I'm going to explain that to you. But first, please remember to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button if you appreciate the content and if it does help you, of course. So factors that influence muscular strength and hypertrophy. It's generally understood. Well, I should say not generally understood, but a lot of folks will make a tenuous connection between strength and hypertrophy. The stronger you are, the bigger you are, or the bigger, more likely, the bigger or more hypertrophic you are, the stronger you are. And that's simply not the case. They're not always related, although from a programming and training perspective, you are going to see, a closer connection, but they're not always directly related to each other. And so what ACE wants you to know is that there's multiple variables, factors that influence muscular strength and hypertrophy. The first one, hormone levels. Keep in mind, growth hormone, testosterone, your two main anabolic hormones. Some of the things they don't go into because it's probably not that necessary, is that anabolic is only one attribute or characteristic, particularly of testosterone, which also has an androgenic component to it, but it's the anabolic components that we look at when we're talking about muscular hypertrophy. Remember, you don't just get stronger because you have increased hypertrophy. There is a general correlation if that hypertrophy is being caused or due to specific type of programming. So you would be doing strength training, which for a detrained individual generally has a concurrent increase in hypertrophy to that particular muscle. But the point is that the two hormones that are associated with both strength and hypertrophy are going to be human growth hormone and testosterone. Both of those will decrease with age at differing time elements, depending on men, whether you're male or female. Individuals, as ACE says, who have higher levels of growth hormone and testosterone typically have enhanced potential for muscle development. The other thing is sex, male and female. Obviously, there is a difference between males and females, not just from a hormonal perspective, which has a huge effect on strength and hypertrophy, but also the total amount of actual muscle mass. There's no difference between my muscles on a guy and a female. I mean, muscle tissue is muscle tissue, whether it's on a male or female. The differences we generally see are going to be fiber typing. You're going to see that over on the next page on 367. But the total and the total amount of muscle, so the ability to generate force in a muscle, obviously is going to be related to the total number of muscle fibers and the type of muscle fibers. So again, if you read through that little section, the reality is that females are no stronger than males pound for pound when it comes to actual force output. Below the skin, muscles are muscles, and they give you a couple of numbers. Not necessary to know these from a testing perspective, but just so you know, 2.2 to 4.4 pounds of force generation for every square centimeter. It's roughly what square centimeter? I don't know, about the size of you, a little smaller. I would say, well, more like your pinky nail, something like that. Of course, age is a heavy determinant for strength and hypertrophy. Everything else being equal, the older you get, due to these other factors, hormonal levels, things like that, the older you get, the weaker you get. Again, everything else being equal, and the decreased muscle mass, hypertrophy. Well, you will decrease in muscle mass, male or female, doesn't matter. And so age is a big factor. Muscle fiber type, of course, type 1 and type 2 fibers, the type 2A and type 2X, and the type 2 area and type 1 fibers are definitely going to be one of the main determinants of how strong you are. So type 2 fibers, fast twitch muscle fibers, generally have increased power output compared to type 1 fibers for any number. The main reason is the actual diameter and the total amount of ATP ACE activity that's available in these different muscle fiber types. So the more enzymatic activity that is available, i.e., through the cross-bridging activity that occurs, the more activity you have for more ATP production, the more energy is available for yada yada cross-bridging. Get the idea? Greater force output, greater percentage of cross bridges in type 2X fibers, for instance. And there is some changeover, some crossover potential. Type 2X fibers looking, tasting, feeling more like type 2A. There's a fair amount of research out now as of the taping of this video that kind of shows a little bit more potential change in the gradation or the ability of type 1 fibers, type 2A fibers, type 2X to all kind of switch and change gradient wise to become more like the other ones. So type 2A fibers are kind of a mix between type 1, endurance based, lots of myoglobin and mitochondria. Type 2X, little to no mitochondria. There's some in there, but very little. So they're not going to provide a whole lot of endurance capability. Type 2A fibers can be pretty strong, and there's training protocols that can focus a little bit more on one of the three, believe it or not. We don't do that with the average client, but I'm saying that from a purely strength or purely endurance training perspective, you can do that. So age, obviously an important factor. Muscle fiber typing. Yeah, it's a good idea, and ACE will tell you, train for all muscle fiber types. That means do high repetitions, speed training, power training, whatever the case is. Muscle length is actually a pretty important factor. Okay, so the longer the muscle belly in perspective or relation to its tendon attachments, the greater the diameter of that muscle can get. So you can have a greater what appears to be hypertrophic effect when the muscle belly is longer, particularly in relation to its tendon length. So perhaps the most important factor for attaining large muscle, so hypertrophy, is muscle length relative to bone length. Well, I said tendon length, but bone length as well. Muscles typically attached to bones by connective tissue called tendons, yada, yada, important information. The point is that muscle length from that perspective, from a hypertrophic perspective, is really, really important. Those with relatively long muscles possess greater potential for muscle development than those are relatively short. And they use the example of a gastroc muscle. And then we get to limb length, which is going to determine the length of the muscle as well as the tendon. So limb length is very important, but this is where figure 935, the whole point of this video, is to focus in on this because it deals with it deals with what's known as torque, or the concept of torque, which they don't use that term. That is a term in physics that's used, but that's basically what we are talking about here. But the key to understanding this example of a lever system in a human body, is to understand F sub A, R sub A. Okay, those are the two distances, and this is the critical point, and this is why it's really important to understand this. These are genetically predisposed scenarios. You're not changing the length of what you see here as F sub A. So that's going to be the lever arm of the motive force. Okay, motive force simply means the muscle itself. So that's what F is. So motive force is F in this, and that's just the muscle, the ability of the muscle to generate force or tension. That's what motive force is. And if you multiply the motive force times the lever arm of the motive force, or F sub A, that's in a distance. Now, again, they're not telling you that the motive force is in newtons per pound. They're not giving you that. It's not necessary. All they want you to know is that the power of the muscle, the strength output of the muscle, times the distance between the tendon, and that's what you want to see here, the length between the tendon and the pivot point of the elbow. That's what F sub A is. So if you notice on the picture, in the figure, you'll see that black dot, and F sub A is pointing to that. That's the actual pivot point of the joint. And the tendon, in this case, the tendon of the bicep is a certain distance, perpendicular distance from that point. It's like an inch, maybe an inch and a half. I don't know. Everybody is different. That's the key. The longer the further the tendon of the bicep, in this case, the further away it is from the joint, from that, from X, which is the pivot point of the joint, the further away it is, everything else being equal, you're stronger. You're stronger, because the equation basically says that the force of the muscle, let's just say it is what it is, force of the muscle times that distance. So the longer the distance, the bigger that number. And basically this equation is saying that the motive force of the muscle times the length of that lever arm is equal to two other variables. One is going to be the resistance, how much weight you're holding. Is it a 10-pound dumbbell, 15-pound dumbbell, whatever the case is, times the length, the lever arm of the resistance, or R sub A, which is basically the pivot point to the resistance. So you have these two distances. F sub A is the elbow, right? The pivot point of the elbow and the distance to the tendon, right? And the longer distance, which is the elbow joint, position of the elbow joint, all the way out to where you're holding the dumbbell. So those two lengths are being compared to the forces that are being produced, one by the bicep muscle or the muscle itself, and the resistance that you're using. So a length and a force is equal to another length than the weight, whatever you're holding. That's the easiest way to understand this. And that's basically, when we talk about limb length and lever systems, that's really what we're talking about. So with those four variables, remember what they were: strength of the muscle. Watch this. So got my equal sign in here. Strength of the muscle multiplied by the distance between the tendon of the bicep on the forearm, on the radius, the tendon of the bicep, the length between the tendon of the bicep and the elbow pivot point itself. That's going to be equal to the weight of the dumbbell that you're holding. And we're just using, this is just an easy example to use, multiplied times the length of where the dumbbell is being held in the hand and that same point at the elbow. And that's basically what figure 935 is showing you. Again, if the tendon attachment, which you have no control over, if you got your tendon further away from the elbow joint, you just pick the right parents, right? That means you will be stronger. Everything else being equal, you'll be able to curl a heavier dumbbell. This is one of the reasons why you'll see some power lifters, weightlifters, who have really short arms. So they can bench press a lot of weight. Why? Because of the lever system. The shorter the length of the bone, the further the distance of the tendon attachment from the pivot point. Again, that's called torque, or the concept of torque is thrown in there. They're not going to talk to you about that because that's too much physics. But all of those variables make an individual, everything else being equal, either stronger or weaker. Again, it's one of the reasons why you may have a very, very hypertrophic muscle, and it looks big. But if the tendon attachment of that long, very hypertrophic muscle, if that tendon attachment is closer to the pivot point of the joint, I don't care how hypertrophic it is, it's weaker. It's not able to develop as much overall pulling power as a smaller muscle with maybe a little bit less overall motive force capability, but further from the pivot point of like the elbow. That muscle, even though it's less hypertrophic, has better leverage, and therefore can pull heavier weight. Again, classic examples are to look at top level, high level weightlifters, even Olympic weightlifters or power lifters who are big. They're heavily muscled, but nothing like a competitive body. Think of pro bodybuilders who are heavily hypertrophic, heavily muscled. Their hypertrophy relative to a power lifter is significantly greater. Yet, chances are, as strong as most bodybuilders are, and most are, they simply can't do what the highest level power lifters are capable of doing. A lot of that is related to the leverage systems that they were born with. So there it goes. So that was the idea. I wanted to help you out. Tendon insertion point, limb length. This is one of the, and just read through those two. Very interesting. They keep it very simple. Ace did a good job keeping it very simple. I'm not saying you're going to see a lot of any questions on this area specifically, but it is interesting to understand, or to at least be able to speak intelligently to a client who's really strong or not very strong, but hypertrophic. And so that's sort of the basis of understanding figure 935. And if you have any questions or you want to leave a comment, please do so. Let us know that you understood the video. If it was helpful, by the way, again, if you thought it was helpful, thumbs up. If you do want full access to the ACE exam study materials, the entirety of all we provide for the ACE exam study, please go ahead and click on the link in the discussion box below. Remember, every Wednesday night, we do a live exam study, 6 to 6:30 p.m., and that's using Quizlet. Now, if you've used Quizlet, we actually create a competitive environment called Quizlet Live. You don't want to miss it. 30 minutes Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Join us for that, and we'll see you there. Have a great week. Thanks.